Greg will record the session. So there you go. Thank you, Greg. I know it's only a week after the symposium, but so we respect the schedule that we have and the calendar of everybody. I thought it's a good idea to have this meeting on time. And tomorrow we have a webinar, remember, so it's kind of a little bit dense the last couple of weeks, but that's a good problem to have. We'll talk about the events. All right, so let's see. This is the agenda for today, the regular section update with the membership trends. This meeting, we have the update from the annual election that happened, that formally took place last week at the symposium. Then we have the activities update. This time I have the robotics and DWIS, the demo that is coming up in September. Same slides that Eric presented at the symposium. I thought for the benefit of the members that couldn't attend to see what's coming up and decide for themselves, you know, if they're interested, if they want to engage, etc. And in the second half of the call, we have a presentation by Mark Willard from H&P. This is a paper that he presented at the symposium. There were some technical difficulties there, you know, transitioning from one session to the next. So for half of it, he presented it without the slides. It was pretty interesting. And so I thought to give him a chance to present it again here. It's not directly related to automation, but it's very much related to data quality. And that's something that affects us very, very directly. I think you will find it interesting. And that's pretty much the agenda for today. We will close at the end. You know, I think we're going to use the whole time, but we'll see. All right. So starting with the membership trend. These are the numbers, how they look now at the beginning of the year. That drop that you see on the left graph, don't read too much into it. It compares 2 months of 2024 with the entire 2023. So, sorry. So it's meaningless, that drop. What's more important are the graphs on the right side, where the green bars are slightly ahead, which are for the 2024 year. They are slightly ahead compared to 2023. So that's a good trend. The recovery seems to be continuing compared to 2023. The last couple of years, after COVID, basically, we have a consistent recovery. The student population continues to be increasing, which is very encouraging because these members are the ones that become professional members at a rate of something like 20, 30 a year, something like that, I think. The geographical distribution of the membership is similar to what we have seen the last few meetings. The two biggest sections are the Gulf Coast here, North America, and Middle East. They're going back and forth between the size, you know, which for some reason the slides keep moving. I'm sorry for that. So there are two big sections, but there are many smaller sections, and we see a lot of growth in non-traditional areas, you know, Asia, Africa, South America, which is positive sign, both professional members and students. And as you will see the next slide, with the elections, we try to match that trend. On the the other two, yes.
Yeah, I've got a question here. I wonder if the membership chair can actually make another view that shows DSATS membership versus sections, because the management one has about 6,000 members. Now they cheated because everybody who was under the management discipline got put into it when it started. But I think it'd be interesting to see like the R&D, DSATS, or whatever they call themselves now, maybe DUPS, have a look at some similar technical sections and see how we stack up against them. Because then you can judge and say we're similar or we're behind or we're ahead.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. I think we need help from Greg to do that, because I don't think myself or other DSATS members have access to the data, the dashboard of other technical sections. However, Having said that, I made that point at the symposium, comparing our trends with those from SPE as a whole. And Robin Macmillan stepped up and he said, you know, those numbers are similar for the entire society. We haven't reached yet the pre-pandemic level. There is a recovery, but we'll work with Greg and try to get the actual numbers for the society, as well as a few technical sections, and see how we compare.
Robert, this is Robert here. I want to jump in a second. Sorry, John. The numbers from SPE membership seem to me to give an idea of who might be interested in the topic in general. But what I really like to see is how many members are active in the section. And so in the ISCWSA, we see that activity more on the ISCWSA membership rather than just simply the wellbore positioning technical section membership. So just a comment there in terms of activity rather than just signing up blindly for anything they can see.
It's a good point, Robert. Thank you. And we are seeing that pattern in DSATS as well. Even though we have something like 2,500 members, only 30, 40 people consistently participate in the different activities. And we're looking for ways how to engage them more, whether it's through the technical section itself, or through some of the activities like the drillbotics or DWIs, etc. You remember when we were discussing how to formulate DWIs, we tried to use WPTS and ISCWSA as a template to have, you know, SPE, let's say the open forum on one side, and also the industry, let's say, participation, and the SMEs on an entity that is not bound by SPE constraints on the other side, you know. And now how well that works remains to be seen, but it's a valid point that we need to constantly look how to raise the numbers of people that are participating. I don't think we are there. We have very few consistent contributors. All right, so that's where we stand on the numbers, on the participation. This is now the list of board members and officers as it came out of the last cycle, you know, with the formal, let's say, vote at the symposium. The people with the star are people that are continuing. The people that are in bold are the new people. And it happened the last month, basically, this some people. So we had a few people that we nominated about 4 weeks before the symposium. That email went out to the entire community. After that email, a few people self-nominated themselves. They stepped up and they expressed interest. They were seconded by as it's supposed to be, you know, by the bylaws. And we didn't have any competition. All the candidates ran unopposed, and we filled pretty much all the positions that we had and created a few new ones. So you can see that we have full board, 3 new members with Andre, Austin, and Sassi, who moved there from officers. And we have a couple of new program chairs for Africa and for Australia. And we have 2 deputy program chairs for Europe and for Asia, for continuity reasons, because as people cycle out, there is someone behind to take over. So that's a healthy sign. Now, we just need to have all these people participate actively in the calls, get the training that Greg offers. There is one at the end of the month, I think. And I suggest that I think it's a good idea for the new people to attend that, mostly to get access to some resources, you know, some websites or some material that explain what is the role of the officer, how the sections work, what we can do, what we cannot do. It's very helpful, that material, as an initial orientation. So that's the current list. And I mean, these new people, it's not exactly new, some of them are new, will hit the ground running because we have the ATC is coming up. It's only 6 months away. And we have made a proposal for a special session. I'm not sure we're going to get a special session, but for sure we will get a networking session similar to what Austin did last year. But this time, Deep will take over. And as you can see, Deep moved from membership chair to program chair North America, and Nasi Cool is taking over as membership chair. So hopefully we have, some fresh energy in the section, some new people, and it's good to have, to spread the number of officers that roll over a period of 3 years. If you remember, in 2022, we had the V2 initiative, and at that time it was like a major overhaul. We had something like, 25, 30, maybe not 30, but many people coming on board. So we don't want to have every 3 years like a big wave of people coming in and out. We want to spread this over 3 years. So that what happened this year is healthy, because we have 10 people every year essentially that will be moving in and out. So we maintain some continuity, balancing with some new ideas, new people coming in every year. So that's where it is. Welcome to all the new people. Look forward to working with all of you and getting help from all of you and learning from all of you. Any questions before we move on to the next section from anyone?
Yep. I think, Dimitris, I think it's important to keep a track on how active each of these people are.
Yes.
Because it's great to have a long list. I mean, I see other technical sections that have long lists of names, but it's only valuable if the people are contributing in the way that should be contributing. And if they're not, they need some leadership to encourage them to contribute. I mean, all these program chairs, that's a lot of folks that need herding around to get them to start to deliver programs. And as you know, if you do a program with external speakers, like people gave the feedback this last week, you've got to start the year before. You can't do that last minute. So
6 months. Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of lessons learned that ought to be shared with these people, and then they ought to be led to deliver.
Absolutely, John. Thank you for the comment. We have two, and it reminds me a point that I think it's good to bring up. We have only a few major events. We have the symposium and the ATC session. There is nothing stopping us from having more and distribute them, especially now that we have new populations of students, particularly. Last year, Binit organized, not organized, he contributed at a conference that took place in India, and he created, a presence, a booth for DSATS, where he gave an overview of the section, etc. And I think that was very good. And we need to learn from that and do this everywhere. Not only, in Australia now, in South America, in Africa. I think that's how we raise awareness and attract new people. So absolutely, what you are saying is true. The point that you reminded me was that we had a mentor program where the more senior members and members from the board, they offered the volunteer to kind of take under their wing some of the new people as coming in and answer questions and give guidance and not let them alone, not leave them alone, to drown. And I think we can do this again now as needed. And I can help coordinate that and assign people. So at least the new people have someone to reach out to if they feel they need some support. So yes, I think this is a very good point that you bring up. Robert.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that to remind John that last year we put the organization in place. So we have an organization in place that for the global program chairs. So Calvin leads the coordination of the global program chairs. So we have part of that organization in place already.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Any other comments before we move on? I'm trying to see what time it is, to time it with Mark coming in. Okay, so let's move to the next slide here, which is the activity updates. Here I borrowed a few slides that Fred prepared for the symposium for the Drillbotics, and also a few slides that Eric showed that again at the symposium. So these are the two teams. What is wrong with PowerPoint? These are the two teams that participated last year's competition, and they were at the drilling conference last week to present their work. One of them is from the University of Stavanger. The other one is from the Technical University Clausthal in Germany. The first team, the University of Stavanger, worked on well control. It was modeling and simulation, the virtual rig. The second team actually built a small rotary steerable tool, and 1.5 inch diameter, and they drilled a directional well to hit a target. These are the groups A and B that we, as we call them, in the Drillbotics competition. As you probably remember, we helped cover the costs for the participation of these teams at the conference, to keep them motivated, basically, because they keep covering the costs themselves, some of them out of pocket, for building their rigs and running their tests, etc. So thankfully, Drillbotics has been able so far to help. But as Fred has said many times, and we can't forget that support is drying out. And without it, Drillbotics cannot continue for much longer. I think we will be able to do the same, basically bring the winners to the conference for this year's competition, 23-24. But I'm not sure we can start a new cycle at the end of the 24 competition. And Sasi is here. Maybe you can give us an update, Sasi, if I miss something, but that's the reality. We need some sponsors and judges to come in to keep the competition going. Now, one more comment, Sasi, sorry. John McPherson has opened a new door, and he's trying to give a geothermal flavor to Drillbotics. Get some support, from the Department of Energy and from the industry, and bring in some funds as well as expertise to set the goals and the objectives for the competition and start introducing students. We'll see how that works out. There is nothing concrete yet, but at least John is trying to find a new avenue of support. Sasi, any comments, any thoughts here?
Yeah, just want to add, Dimitrios, this last week was the first time we had the two teams put together a common paper, right? Where we had the two university teams work together and put together a paper. Even though they worked on different aspects of the competition, it was good to see them work together with Fred kind of facilitating and coordinating and presenting it. Drilling contractor actually interviewed them. So there's a video out there. I'll post a link to the video on the chat. So if you're interested, definitely take a look at it, getting us some good visibility on the Drillbotics competition. Definitely need sponsors. We also need judges. For phase one this year, I think we had feedback from probably 2 judges overall, right? It's important to have the judges' participation also. In terms of timing, the next step in our competition for this year is probably sometime in the May-June timeframe. We'll be finalizing the dates for the final competition. So we'll share that with everybody here and the DSATS membership. So
repeat that. Sasi, it froze for a second. When is the next step, timing-wise?
Probably May-June. We'll probably finalize the dates for the final competition for this year. So once we finalize it, I'll send out the communication out to the team.
Okay. Thank you, Sasi. So the next couple of slides, just to give an idea to everybody, this is some of the logic that the Stavanger team built in their well-controlled scheme for detecting the event and reacting to the event. That's part of the paper that they published. You can see more details there. And this is the small rotary steerable tool that the team from Germany put together. You can see it has, pads that extend out mechanically and how to control the steering of, how to control the steering of the well. They take surveys, not while drilling, but after every few centimeters of drilling, they stop and they take surveys to decide where they are and what direction they need to go, how to steer. So it was an eye-opening experience for the students, I think, to deal with all these issues, how to make the sensors work, how to deal with the vibration, how to make the tool more reliable. Almost always, all this work is not the result of 1 year, but what one team learns and builds passes to the next team. So what we see here is the result of several years of work with people, students, coming in and out of the team. Usually there is an advisor that keeps the program going, and they make changes from year to year. The students, they do change concepts, they change designs, they make their tools more compact. This one, for example, the tool that they had this year is almost half the size of the tool that they had last year. It is really very encouraging to see, the persistence of these students and how they try to improve their jigs and do a better job from year to year. So we need to encourage them. If we want to bring new people in the industry, we need to encourage this kind of efforts. I think we all agree on that. Like we said, for this year competition, there are 7 teams going forward, split between groups A and B. And this is what Sasi was saying earlier, that phase 2 tests will be May, June. And that's the situation where we are with the money, like exposure, what commitments that we have, and how we need to bring in more support, to keep the program going past this year. Okay, all right. So let's move on to the DWIS activity. As a reminder,
Sorry,
and here I'm using, yeah.
Demetrius, can I ask a question about how sort of what was the industry or audience enthusiasm for Drillbotics? How was it received overall? I'm thinking about the marketing and just if somebody's trying to sponsor this, what do they get besides the students? I'm just curious what you think about that. Fred's probably a better guy to answer that, but he's no longer there.
I can give you my 2 cents, Calvin. At the conference, the booth that the students had, as I was going in and out, from the floor there a few times, always there were people talking to them and asking and learning, and the students who presented their paper as well during the symposium, they were very engaged. There was no lack of interest. And in principle, I think everybody agrees and encourages this work. Where we come short is raising funds, getting the money in, especially this year, and getting judges, because it requires some time commitment. Now, in terms of what the sponsor gets for their investment, I'm not sure that there is enough a significant marketing advantage or benefit saying, okay, company A contributed to Drillbotics competition, and that is something that carries a lot of weight in the industry. I don't think that's the case. However, I think it's very important for the industry as a whole to keep efforts like this alive, because this is how we show our appreciation to the students and expose them to the technology, the challenges that we have, and show them that oil industry is not just emissions and dirt, but there is also technology and there is cutting edge technical content, and spread that message out to the universities and the younger population, so we keep recruiting them later. If we don't do that, I don't think we have the right to complain that we cannot bring people in, but I'll let Fred take over from here.
Calvin, that's a good question. And I think the biggest outreach as a sponsor is that the students see who is sponsoring the program, and that's who they want to possibly interview with. In Norway, for example, we have a team throughout the competition, we have a team with 5 members, but in Norway, they may have 10 on a team. And the other people are basically interns. They have to interview with the team leader to see if they can be on the team. And then they get assigned minor tasks as an undergraduate, and as they continue in their education, they get more and more advanced. And all of these students have jobs well before they graduate, because the industry in Norway sees these students as really being above their peers. They know things that are not in the textbooks. They learn how to work as a team in multiple disciplines, which is what the industry needs. So as a sponsor, you keep the program going. As a judge, you get to figure out of that team of 5 or 10 people, which ones do you really want to have? You can see which people on that team are actually the major contributors and which ones are just working in the background. So the advantage to you is if you're trying to hire young people with experienced, basically this is some form of field experience, to understand as an engineer, how do you find out how it breaks and then make it where it won't break? There's a lot of pieces like that that are pretty important, I think.
Yeah, I want to add something. You know, we do a lot of internships within ExxonMobil, and exactly what you said. What does an internship get you? You get to see somebody work in an actual environment. You see how well they work together with others, and you see how they apply the knowledge that they've learned, not just book knowledge or a test. So I consider this as good as any internship in terms of vetting future employees or people that you want to keep track of. And my view is, those that are smart, you keep track of the whole rest of their life and your life. You don't, I mean, I don't care where they go, what they do, you just keep track of them because you know they're going to be making a difference. So anyway, that's,
Yeah.
I'm
Paul,
fully supportive.
What did you think of Ty Cunningham?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you know Ty Cunningham?
Oh, yes. Very, very well.
Talk about him.
So, yeah, well, without a doubt. I mean, I knew Ty before he came to work for ExxonMobil. He has been a change agent. He is we talk about relentless redesign. He is a consummate learner, lifelong learning kind of a guy. And how do I say it? He just wants to know everything. And that's the kind of people we really, really like. I mean, without a doubt. So yeah.
So he was on the winning team for Texas A&M, just to give you an idea of the kind of people that were getting through this program.
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, by the way. I don't know if it is that the program helps them become that way, or if those are the people that tend to join the program. Either way, it doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. You've vetted some really good talent, and that is worth everything. So
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Fred. I see Mark joined us. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I was running a little late. I had a conflicting meeting.
Perfect. We have a few more slides. I have a few more slides for my part, and then like in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you can take over, okay?
Perfect.
All right. So let's continue with the DWIS update real quick. So just these are the same slides that Eric used last week. I thought it's good to have more people on the same page, those that couldn't attend the symposium. So just as a reminder, the demo last year, the objective was that to demonstrate that we can have a platform where software applications, we call them advisors, can come in and out like plug and play and recognize what data is available from the rig and from everybody else, and also any output they produce, recommendations, control actions, limits, etc., to be able to put it back into the system, and everybody else would be able to recognize it as well. So that was the objective from last year's demo that took place after the after or before the ATC, was it not ATC? It was a drilling conference again. No, I'm sorry. It was September. It was September. It was online.
Before ATC.
Before the ATC, yeah. Thank you, Eric. So that was we had the team in Norse did most of the work, but there were participants from the industry, Halliburton, Sekal, Aker BP, etc. It went well. It was a first step, and we're trying to build on this year. And this year, here, this is what I described, basically. I went ahead of myself, I guess. So for this year, the objective is to show some more aspects of interoperability and the work that is going in DWIS. And more specifically, and you will see that in a graphic later, the idea is to develop software once and deploy it many times. In other words, if a vendor, whether it's a service company, a consulting firm, a university, an operator, or whoever it is, they develop a software, for example, that is monitoring the wellbore for hole cleaning, just as an example. You don't want to develop a different version of that software depending where you deploy it. The idea is to develop it once, prove it, validate it, etc., and then be able to deploy it from rig A to rig B to rig C to on different hardware setups, different platforms. Typically, what we have in the rigs, in all these rigs, is what we call the ADCS, Automated Drilling Control System. This is a layer like, for example, Novos or Deal from HMH, or Neighbors has a platform, Ensign has a platform. I'm sure H&P has something. I don't know the name. So all these layers that sit on top of the rig control system act as the interface where you can come in from outside, from the external world, and provide your advice, your recommendation, etc. And those layers are the ones that are responsible to make sure that you don't exceed the capabilities of the rig, you don't create conflicts, blah, 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 blah. That's what we're trying to prove in this year's demo, that the same advisor can work with different platforms, with different ADCS systems. The slides went way ahead of me. Apologies for that. I don't know what's happening. So Eric, and thank you to Eric, actually, for having convinced NOV, both from Norway and here in the US, to participate in this and support this effort. And hopefully more ADCS vendors participate going forward. But just to put all this, in context, so everybody follows what's happening. The idea is to have, like I mentioned, let me see if I can find the mouse. 1 second. Here. So to have different ADCS systems from different providers that drive, each one of them drives their rig, accept information from the same advisor, from the same DWIS layer above. So there is a DD Hub, another component that the team in Norse has put together, which is like a blackboard, collecting all the data coming in from the different sources, manage the timing, the units and all that stuff, and feed it down, translate it, if you want, to the specific ADCS. And everybody else above here doesn't need to know what specific hardware you are dealing with at the rig. It all looks the same for all these advisors up here. And there are some supporting functions. Of course, there is a logger, which is very important for traceability and accountability of what happened and why it happened. There is another module that puts advice from different pieces together and resolves conflicts between the different advisors. There is a scheduler that it decides at a higher level what is the sequence of tasks that need to take place. There is a module that produces an enhanced drilling state. The rig itself has a rig state, but there is more to it about what's happening downhole, about what happens with the reservoir, etc., that the rig does not necessarily know. So this piece here puts together a bigger rig state that is available for everybody, so they can, everybody means all the advisors, all the software pieces, so they can decide what recommendation to produce, what's happening, and what is the next best thing, you know. So the idea is to make all these green pieces and the gray pieces work transparently with any rig hardware that you have underneath. It's an ambitious goal, but it's a milestone. I think this is really a bigger milestone than last year in terms of DWI's objectives and proving interoperability. So again, this is going to be going on for the next few months, and we're going to get updates in between. I really look forward to the demo in September. We have a few more companies this year. I think Baker also is on board this time. I'm not sure who else we have, Eric. I don't know if you have here in the list, but there is like 5 or 6 industry participants that will support this, apart from the ADCS vendors. And I think now Andre Petrobras expressed some interest, which is excellent. So the more, the better, needless to say, you know. And Eric and the team on Norse have very generously and kindly agreed to make all this code, all this infrastructure, or most of it, let's say, open access, available to everybody. If anybody wants to adopt some of this technology to modify and deploy commercially, they're welcome to learn from this and use it and help propel the industry forward. I think there are significant gains in efficiency that can come out of this effort, but we just have to keep pushing. There is no way around it. And this may seem like a high-end application now, but I have no doubt that we can scale it appropriately to cover different markets, US land, you know, offshore, etc. It doesn't have to be the same complexity everywhere. We can, as we go through these demos, through these learning exercises, the right questions are coming up, and we try to answer them, and we see what applies where, and what is the right balance between value we get out and complexity that we introduce. I mean, we're not going to get it all perfect the first time, but we have to keep pushing forward as an industry, you know, as a group, not as individual participants. Okay, I'll stop here. Any questions from anybody before we move on? All right, thank you. The last slide is upcoming events. Last slide before we go to Mark. So we had on the top 2, 3, you know, you can see the recent events that happened. The session in San Antonio, an SP live about AI and drilling that Erodica had in February, the symposium last week, and going forward now, we have a few. Tomorrow, we have a very interesting webinar by Matt Forso and Baker that are going to tell us about the closed loop geo-steering well placement system that they demonstrated in Norway with Equinor. I think that's going to be a very interesting webinar. Of course, we're going to have a session like I mentioned at the ATCE in September that DIP is going to put together. It's not going to be necessarily a formal special session, but it's going to have, we'll make it as useful and valuable as we can. There is another webinar that we have in October, which will SPE-sponsored webinar. We don't have a topic yet for that. There is a forum that Matt and the team are trying to put together on digital drilling and wells. It's going to be somewhere in Texas here in the fall. The details are still being worked out. Of course, we have these bi-monthly calls like the one today that happen every 2 months, where we have an opportunity to bring in a presenter, like Mark, for example, and present a paper or a field trial or anything that you would like to share. This is an open standing invitation. And then there is something that I don't have here on the list yet that I think it's a good idea for us to have our own webinars, similar to what the management technical section and some of the other technical sections do. They create their own webinars with a little sponsorship from the industry, and they bring in, you know, some high caliber speakers, they record, and that content can become available on SPE's platform with approval. And that gives us the option to have as many webinars as we want, one every month, not 2 a year that we have here, you know. So I think if we have the participation and we have the content, I think it's worth looking into that option. I don't think the logistics are complicated enough to stop us from doing it. Others are doing it successfully, and some very high quality webinars are produced this way. So I think we can do the same. So that's all I had here in this section. Any comments or anything? Otherwise, we can move on.
Demetrius, a question. How did the budget turn out for the symposium last week?
I don't have the final numbers, John, but I think we made a little bit of profit. Not 10K like last year, but closer to 2K maybe. But I don't have the final numbers.
Okay.
All right. So, Mark, if you are ready, we can pass it to you now.
No, Demetrius, quick question.
Yeah.
Matt
Yeah.
Forshaw, what platform is that webinar on?
On SPE, if you go to SPE Connect, Mark, and you look for it, you will find, and I think you need to register, if I'm not mistaken, for it to get the link to watch it.
Okay.
You do have to register, and it's free for SPE members. It's $119 for non-SPE, but you have to go through the process, and then they will send you a link, streaming.spe.org. I'm just looking at it. I assume it's their streaming site. I'm not sure what format, like Zoom or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Let me stop presenting here, Mark, and you can take over.
I mean, I was going to just add one point there. Renewing your SPE membership is on the same order as $119 or potentially less. So if you're just subscribing to the stream,
in one webinar you get your value back.
Yeah, but then that would suggest I wanted to hang out with you guys, man.
Right. I know. Well, so my co-author who has taken over my position as membership chair for the ISCWSA would say, and when you renew your SPE membership, please check the box to also be part of the wellbore positioning technical section, not just the drilling systems automation technical section.
So I stopped sharing, Mark. You can try to see if you can share. I think you are represented already.
Let's see here. Did this catch the correct screen?
It came up. That's fine.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and talk with you today. This study that we presented at the drilling conference in Galveston was a collaboration between our remote operating centers at H&P that oversee a lot of data, both on H&P rigs and through our survey management, formerly MAGVAR unit, across all sorts of rigs and sharing all sorts of data with various service companies, and David Gibson, who through his Gibson Reports venture looks at a lot of data that ends up in public databases, regulatory databases, etc. And the intent was really to start a conversation about how we handle data in general as an industry. Also, I'm going to apologize in advance if I seem a little distracted during this presentation. It'll be the first time I'm giving it where I can actually see my slides. So if they shock me, then this is going to be something different. But with that, here we are talking about blind trust challenges in data sharing for oil and gas well construction. Like I was saying, the goal is really to start a discussion. We're going to highlight some challenges. We're going to highlight some things we recommend, but it's really just the first step in a long journey that our industry is going to need to take. And I think it's an important conversation to start because, especially with this group and similar groups, where there's this thought that, you know, AI, machine learning is going to help us do so much, automation is going to help us do so much. Those systems are always going to be limited by data. Ooh. Sorry, my slides were advancing kind of randomly there. So I start with a thought experiment. Imagine if you are drilling a well, planning a well, etc., and a stranger walks into your office. And this stranger suggests some drastic course of action. A person you've never met, a person you've never vetted, you know, and they say, hey, we need you to trip out of hole. We need you to sidetrack. Hey, you need to move the location you're planning on drilling your wells. What would you do? Would you believe this stranger? Would you take their advice? Probably not. You know, you probably would say, hey, this is a person I've never talked to. Why should I make a potentially tens of millions of dollars decision based on a random suggestion? But if you do any of your planning using external databases, that's essentially what you're doing. A stranger has put that data there. If you're taking it at face value and you're making a decision based on that data, then you're giving that stranger that same amount of authority over your operation. Because if you think about, have you ever had to replan a well based on someone else's surveys? Have you ever set a pad based on where they reported surface locations? Have you ever sidetracked because of a collision avoidance concern? We've heard, you know, have you ever planned out whether a field might be economical because you look at offset wells days versus depth charts? You know, these are big decisions that assume some level of quality in these external data sources you're using. And that level of authority is potentially not what you should be giving them in all cases, because, you know, the way data moves through our industry, you have some amount of collection on the rig site. It's passed around between all sorts of folks, sliced and diced, used every which way. And as we'll talk through in some of these examples, there's a lot of challenges in that, particularly in the sense that as you move away from the person who collected the data, how well it's recorded, how accurately it's recorded, how much you preserve metadata is often lost. And by the time you get to, you know, the sausage of these external databases that feed your next round of decisions, it's kind of a, you know, an open issue as to what really we should be doing. And in some cases, a person evaluating the data can understand what's reasonable, but is it always true that an automation system is going to understand the same context a person might? For instance, sometimes this data gets so bad throughout the chain that it becomes unactionable. Here's a real well that is in the database for the Louisiana regulator, where a well that is reported as being in East Baton Rouge has lat longs that would place it on the Canadian border in Minnesota. You know, we speculated that it might be that this well is on a rotation, and in its 2 off weeks, it lives in Minnesota only to return to Louisiana. However, again, this data point is just clearly something you can't work with. But this well exists. Like, if you're drilling in East Baton Rouge, Indiana, do you need to worry about this well? If you're drilling in Minnesota, you probably don't need to worry about this well. It's unactionable. But at what point does data become unactionable is really the open question, because there are these extreme outliers, and there are also things that are close enough to be plausible but not. And sometimes the data handling process itself creates this challenge. So, for instance, it's interesting. I understand it's necessary, but it's interesting that we include first take points on permitted well plans. So, for folks who might not be familiar, in the US, it is common that when you apply to the regulator to be able to drill the well, you must provide a plausible well path that shows there's a legal way for you to extract the resource. It is a place that you have the legal right to extract. And so you will draw a very simple plan, and you will label where the first point you intend to extract a resource and where the last point you intend to extract a resource is. And based on that, they decide whether or not to allow you to actually move forward. But this well doesn't exist yet. This first take point is not real. But does the person who's going to be perforating or completing or doing any kind of operation down the road realize that this is just a notion and that they'll need to get an actual as drilled well plan, or else this could be hundreds or more feet off. You know, has any directional driller actually ever considered how close to plan they were in the measured depth space? So you might be at the exact correct, you know, northing, easting, and true vertical depth, but if your measured depth is off, you would actually move your first take point relative to what this plan was. But the consequences could be significant. It might involve you perforating an unproductive interval. It might involve you perforating on someone else's lease. But we have to put bad data into the system just as a necessary part of the process. And there's a whole slew of causes for things like this that can create these similar problems. So, you know, we talked about these types of issues in our paper. Accuracy dilution, the idea that as you get away from the person collecting the data, you lose context, you lose importance of nuance, and you lose the ability to quality control that data. Document lifecycle is like this first take point thing. You can have confusion about planned versus actual. You have certain documents that are by their nature dynamic because of the collaboration involved in creating them. You know, you can have different conventions across different organizations. When you have 12 service companies working on a well, do they all name the well the same? You know, does everyone choose the same spud date? And then just anytime there's manual data entry, there's going to be problems. So for accuracy dilution, our first point, again, my background is wellbore positioning, so this is what I think is very illustrative. If you're looking at something as simple as where the surface location of the well is, when you hire a land surveyor to come out and stake your well, they do an excellent job of documenting their data. They will have specific measurements with angles and distances to reference points. They will have, you know, the exact coordinate system, the exact map zone, very specific datum, even down to the version of software they're using to make their calculations. Like this is something where you can tell land surveyors have a lot of lawsuits over what they measure because they are precise. That data from a plat is usually then given to a well planner who will often preserve enough of the data to be adequate to actually place the well. So they'll have a map zone, they'll have a latitude, longitude, they'll have northing and easting coordinates. But any consumer after the well plan usually only copies the piece of information that's relative to them, and usually only the level of accuracy that's relative to them. So for instance, you might end up with a drilling prog that lists the lat and long of the well to 2 decimal places and gives you driving directions that get you within 500 feet because they know at that point you can see the rig and you'll get there, which is fine if you're driving to the rig, but you know that of all the service companies that come to the well, there's going to be someone who puts that number on their report, and that report might then get used by someone else and used by someone else and used by someone else who doesn't realize the chain of custody of where your well actually was. And every step that you lose that accuracy, if a decision's made off that data point, you're going to have additional problems. Document lifecycle. We talked about first take points, the interesting notion of how you have to define where you're going to produce your well before you've actually drilled it. And well plans have lots of this type of back and forth where you drill it, you have an as drilled, you survey it, you might survey it again, you might get those surveys corrected. You might bring in a different rig, and if your measured depths are referenced to the rig floor, you know, that can change things. One anecdote that I enjoy sharing is I worked on a location one time where I got a casing tally, and the casing tally said all the depths were referenced to the rig floor. And then it also said that they had set their conductor casing at 15 feet deep, which if you believe that at face value, that means they have 15 feet of conductor hanging out of the rig floor that doesn't touch the ground. I didn't see that conductor there, so I assumed the casings were actually relative to ground level. But is that a good assumption on my part? Is that going to be something that would be important if you were having to do some kind of workover operation in the future? Who knows? There's also chicken and egg documents, as I like to call them, which is where a document must undergo many revisions based on how it's constructed. So a bottom hole assembly needs data from several different contractors, and often you cannot even get that data from different contractors unless they have a preliminary value. Your logging while drilling, measurements while drilling hand can't tell you your sensor offsets to put on the bottom hole assembly until they get an initial version of that bottom hole assembly. And so there's this back and forth between different companies until you finally get to the last version of the document. When you're on location, this isn't a huge problem because you can talk to all the people. You can say, hey, which of these copies we printed out is the most recent, which is the best one, and you can figure it out. When you are a data analyst 6 years later, when half the people involved don't even work for the same companies anymore, you might not have any idea which is the most accurate, which is correct. And that's before we even get into the problem of, oftentimes the bottom hole assembly starts with just copying the old one. Hey, we know we're going to have about a 30-foot long motor. We'll figure out the serial number later. We'll figure out if we're going to dial it up later. All of those issues, just because, again, the dynamic nature and the number of parties involved. Different organizational conventions. I'm a big fan of finding as old or as historical of a reference I can for particular studies and papers. Folks who have worked in the US are probably familiar with the Poker Lake unit. It is an area of New Mexico that has been developed for over 60 years by many different companies. But by its nature, the Poker Lake unit and the other subsections of it and the other versions of it can make the well names very long. And they often have a whole collection of numbers that are after them, defining sections and pads and well names. And if you look at, even within a single contractor's database, you might see one well planner calls it Poker Lake unit, one calls it PLU, one person might include a hashtag in the number or a dash, one person might have to take that symbol out because a different contractor they're working with software breaks if there's a hashtag in the well name. And again, when you're on a single project, that's fine. You'll figure it out. This isn't going to be confusing. But if you had to have a system that told you how many offset wells you had, are you sure that it would uniquely identify every well and remove all duplicates? I would speculate that there is no one who actually knows how many wells have been drilled in the Poker Lake unit, because it would just not be tracked to the point that you could actually uniquely identify the ones that are drilled, not have duplicates, not have omissions, especially when you consider that, again, this document I pulled, it was written in 1966, and it was already writing about the Poker Lake unit as being kind of a historical field with decades of work having been done on it. And so now when we are here, whatever that is, 60 years later, it hasn't gotten better. And then, anytime there's manual data entry, there's potential for quality control issues. There's potential for gross errors. This was an example that David had that he really wanted to make sure we included, and I like it a lot too. But it's basically, if you just look at the Texas Railroad Commission's database and sort by deepest wells, you find a number of wells that are suspicious, because I am confident if someone had total TD'd their well at 247,000 feet, that it would have appeared on LinkedIn, and we would have seen the post about how they did it in one run, and they would have printed up hats. If someone drilled a 46.8 mile lateral, we would know about it. And then we would hear about how they only drilled out plugs to 20,000 feet. And so there's just, 40 miles of open hole sitting underneath Martin County. And that's all fun. It's nice. I mean, we know these are wrong, but at what point, if you sort by depth, are you confident it's not wrong? And at what point do you actually sort this out? Because again, a huge challenge we have in the oil field is, how do you separate an outlier, something that is so extreme it should not be considered, from sparse signal, something that is extreme but frequent enough we should care? So an example that I think is really important, we wrote a paper about it a few years ago, was tracking unplanned sidetracks. You might think of an unplanned sidetrack as something extreme, something that we avoid, so we shouldn't consider it in our analysis. But in the US, unplanned sidetracks happen every 15 wells. If you're actually analyzing the economics of a field, that is a meaningful amount of your cost, the fact that you're going to have this rare, expensive event. So at which point does this data become a rare but meaningful thing, sparse signal, as opposed to something we need to completely ignore? How do you, this problem gets even worse if you have an automated system digesting the data, an automated system making a decision. You know, is your AI ML algorithm going to say, hey, you know, there's a 1 in 2,000 chance we're going to drill this well 40 miles long because that was in our data set? We need to account for that. Or is that something that gets eliminated? So what can we do? You know, we present a few things that we believe are very good practices for improving data quality. This is by no means complete and exhaustive. It's just a starting point for things that are hopefully simple enough that they should become more common. So first, it's just minimizing manual entry. I know this group, I know some other groups like the IADD, like there's been discussions around building automated protocols, automated systems for transferring data. That's great, and we need to be doing more of it. We also believe that it's important to have internal redundancy whenever possible for documentation. And then finally, along with that internal redundancy, whenever possible, maintaining provenance and the history of where you are getting that data. So you got this file from someone, they got that file from someone, they got that file from someone. Keeping that history of who has owned the data, who was the actual data collector, who did what manipulations to it, is also important. So some examples here. For automated data sharing, or automated data transfer, this is a JSON object. But if you think about how much more information we can put in this for a survey record than is on just an Excel sheet that gets shared or a handwritten thing in a tally book, like we can give wells a true unique identifier as opposed to an API number that each of your contractors disagrees on how many zeros need to be at the end. We can track changes so you know if you have the most recent version of this data, and you can potentially flag what has changed in the data with each update. You can provide accurate units for your values, down to the level that the person sharing it doesn't even necessarily have to understand the nuance. So in this case, we can say that our measured depths are in US survey feet, not international feet, which for those of you who don't do wellbore positioning, you might not realize that there's even multiple versions of feet. And you might not think it's super important, but the difference in these units, if not tracked correctly for well surface locations, can actually move a well in Texas by up to 20 feet, which if you're then doing collision avoidance calculations or things like that might impact whether or not you stop drilling. You know, you can have values shared without, you know, unnecessary loss of precision. So you don't have someone just typing a value into 2 decimal places or 1 decimal place into software, then making it so that one thing calculates a little different for the next, and then it just builds on down the line. And you have all sorts of metadata such as time of measurements and times with time zones. You know, we just had daylight savings time, which is international make the MWD crack their head open day because all the data shifts. Like having all of this automatically handled where the user doesn't have to care means that also when they share it down the line, the systems can do the bookkeeping as opposed to expecting the well planner and the mud engineer and everyone else who gets this data to have to care about the nuance of what went into it. Internal redundancy. So this is almost going the opposite direction of what had been a historical trend with data. When you have to manually transfer and document things, there's this desire to only share the necessary amount of data to reduce workload. And so if you have two things that are equivalent, such as lat long and northing and easting, you probably don't need both. But if you provide both, a person who was not present at the data collection can at least check for internal consistency. So in this case, again, a survey record, we can have inclinations and azimuths, but also the raw measurements of acceleration and magnetism that were used to produce those inclinations and azimuths. This allows someone to check your math and figure out if you should, like how you did your survey calculations. It allows someone to confirm Did you apply a magnetic declination? Did you apply a grid convergence? You know, is this a true north, grid north survey? Did you apply a sag correction? Did you apply some other kind of correction? It enables someone to audit that process in a much better way than if you just got an inclination and azimuth on a survey report that says it's to grid north, but you know, who's sure? And then data provenance. This is actually a kind of success story that I like to share. An operator we were working with does this good practice of when they send their drilling packet, they include the supporting data. And there was a case where our remote operating center escalated that the surface location provided on the plat was different than the surface location provided on the well plan. And that's, again, the fact that that history was there is of a big concern. They went and did an internal review, and it turns out that the well planner had access to a new plat. The site had been resurveyed 6 months later, and it was the most up-to-date data, but now we can have confidence in it. We can have a good process for providing that because we actually have the practice of maintaining the history of where did I get this data from? Where did I get this from? You know, what was actually done in terms of calculation, derivation, correction, et cetera, for this data. And so this builds confidence in the whole process that you are using the correct numbers, you have the right thing, et cetera. Yeah, and so with that, the message we'd like to leave everybody with, you know, data management is everyone's problem, because the ability to find gross errors, obvious errors, is astonishing. And the ability to fix those errors gets harder and harder the longer you go and the farther you are removed from the data source. And the ability of that data to cause, you know, what I would say is a data-driven disaster is only going to increase the more we integrate and automate and accelerate how this moves through different systems and what decisions are happening automatically based on that data. And so that's where what we really need to do as an industry is invest in data integrity and say, hey, data has value, good data has value, auditable data has value. We need to make sure that if we're going to feed automated systems, that we make sure that the fuel of those systems is clean. Because again, going back, anyone who's looked at historical records knows, oftentimes the best you can do is just exclude suspicious data from your data set. But you then have that problem of when does it become suspicious? Again, we have the wells that are in the Texas Railroad Commission database that are 250,000 feet long. Those are obviously incorrect. But if someone says that a 14,700 foot well is 17,400 feet, would we ever catch that? Would we ever realize that that's doing subtle negative things to our analysis? Or would we just make it another oil field mystery of like, oh, we'll make a fudge factor as we get to it? So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to talk, and I hope this starts a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Mark. Excellent. So Q&A, guys.
Yeah, hey, Mark, good presentation. Thanks. And well done at the conference for starting without your slides. Hey, have you ever heard of PPDM, the Global Energy Data Professionals?
The group has come up before, I think.
Yeah, so it's one of the ones I listed on the DSA-BOK website when I found them. So they say they're about us is the PPDM Association is the global not-for-profit society within the energy industry that provides leadership for the professionalization of energy data management through the development and dissemination of best practices and standards, education programs, certification programs, and professional development opportunities. I think it's worth going and having a look at their website, ppdm.org, because they actually have developed standards. They've been around 30 years, and they seem to be funded by companies. And they have developed standards on data descriptions, the kind of things you're talking about. So they're out there, but they're not very visible in the drilling community.
Right. Well, and I think I am because I think I'm familiar with them through like they've been involved with WITSML, right?
Maybe I'm not up to speed on that.
But again, and I know we talked about this a bit also about at the conference itself. Though I think the problem is not lack of standards. The problem is that the folks buying services have not admitted to themselves there's value in following them, because the challenge is not. The core challenge is not that we don't know how to make quality data. The core challenge is that unless someone pays for data quality, a service provider who doesn't provide it is going to win out as the lowest bidder.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like, yeah.
There is a question in the chat, if I may, by Harald. To what extent is the presentation related to uncertainty management?
I mean, I guess in a technical sense, you could argue that you could try to do analysis to attach uncertainty to each data point to help that better feed a system. But in many of these cases, again, surface location is one I'm very familiar with through wellbore positioning. Uncertainty management, even then if done naively, is often impractical, because if we say, and there have been studies done that show this, with wellbore surface locations, if you want to do honest uncertainty management to capture the distribution of wellbore surface locations, then you should have a 60-foot 1 sigma surface location uncertainty for your wellbores. Is that a really practical thing you expect folks to do, to say, oh yeah, I'm going to assume that I only know where any offset wellbore surface location is to, I mean, again, so if the current separation rule is being proposed is potentially a 3.5 sigma, I'm going to assume the surface location distance between two sets of wells is only known to within 500 feet. Is that practical? And that's where, especially when talking about historical data versus data we can qualify, there's such a step change that I think the first step is just trying to audit the data set. And then once we get to where we have good practices applied to things, we can bring in that uncertainty management step, because uncertainty of unqualified data is wild.
Yeah.
Again, if you're doing analysis, if you have 2 or 3 wells in the Texas Railroad Commission database that are over 200,000 feet long, what does that do for the tail of your distribution if you're trying to capture the statistics?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Calvin.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. I'll be biased and say, that I'm not a wellbore survey guy, but I totally understand. And I think so. My question is around, you're representing H&P. Are you familiar with the IADC's new reporting form and the so how effective is that new form in in addressing some of the questions or the uncertainty that you're talking about with respect to drilling?
So I would need to check and talk with some folks who are filling out those forms a little bit more detailed. I know that a big change and a big help for the new IADC form was in better granularity of operations and better ways to capture
the coding,
certain actions. Better coding, right? So that's the stuff we've probably dealt with the most, is how to code certain operations. But again, like data quality, real data quality comes from actually auditing how the data gets entered into any standard. Like, I can assure you, I can put bad data in the new form. Like I could put something erroneous in the new form. It's having a process to make sure that the data that gets put into any system you have is quality controlled and that there's auditability to it for that process. Like, and so one thing I would say Like actually, I can speak personally to one thing is that my team that does research around a lot of drilling data, we look at a lot of H&P data disproportionately, admittedly. A thing we like to do is have the tower sheets, have the IADC forms, and use it as a cross-reference to 1 second data we get off sensors. And that helps us figure out a lot, like, so for instance, what we might see is, pump maintenance happens for a certain amount of time. If we know that within this 2-hour block there was pump maintenance or top drive maintenance or something, and we can see on the 1 second data, was there an actual 90-minute to 2-hour period where the top drive was off, where the pump was off? Like it helps you get auditability and cross-referenceability, but for us, it's again having multiple sources, I would again consider that almost like the data provenance. Like the rig action is data that then feeds that tower IADC sheet, and that IADC sheet feeds the next thing. Like having the layers building upon each other is what helps build confidence in what's happening.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Calvin, in my experience, the IADC sheet is negotiated.
100%. I mean, that's.
Well, I guess my premise is a an addition to the rig. Quality is one thing, but if I don't have any data, I can't actually do any quality. So I'll take some data, even if it's wrong, over no data. And that I just was under the impression this new DDR was something that, and maybe it's operational discipline, Mark, which is off topic, but actually, the quality of the data is operational discipline. So I would say that at the beginning, somebody has to put it in right, but somebody has to put something in.
So I totally agree. Something should be recorded. I would also refer back to the other comment, like it's negotiated because the tower sheet is not necessarily operational discipline because it comes back to contracts. And so something might get coded a certain way on a tower sheet because it might be that if the well site representative asks you to stop and check something, you code it a certain way so it's not coded as downtime because the rig didn't want to go do it.
Right.
And so that's where the tower sheet is often I mean you can almost think of it like a lawyer's timesheet, honestly. Like, hey, if you have to bill someone for this, how do you code your time so that it gets billed? And that's where the starting point for that sheet is.
Well, okay, and yeah, time and the timestamps in there are important context. But the MUD report could be in there, the BHA report. There's so many other things that report offers that shouldn't be, let's say, negotiable. It
is negotiable by contract. If you want to pay a rig extra per day to have their folks record MUD properties,
right,
I guarantee you that someone will do it if you're willing to pay for it. Or if you're willing to pay a MUD company to make sure that it gets in there.
Yeah, and I think maybe that was one of the problems at the onset of the report is, why is it up to the drilling contractor to put all that data in there when it's third parties that are part of that? So the design, there's a design problem there.
Yeah, and it's that all the data sharing problem. There's so many people working, because also like even if they were willing to do it, you probably wouldn't want the drilling contractor putting in all the details of the MUD report because again, they're not going to know the nuance the same way the MUD engineer would.
Sure.
They're not going to know what's important to capture, what's important to say. Like,
no, you're right. No, I wouldn't expect the drilling contractor to do that without being compensated, but that's just like double duty. The whole point is somebody to do it once and we don't need to do it again. And it should come from the purest source, or at least the SME that put it in.
Absolutely. And that's like what I would hope, like from the stuff we talked about in our presentation, is if we got to imagine a perfect world, there would be some kind of automated data transfer from a MUD SME source
Right.
that sends an object to the drilling contractor's system, and it records the data they send us, and we record the metadata they sent us and the important things, you know, like, hey, this rheology was done with this fan instrument, this viscosity was recorded with this method, you know, the funnel was
Yeah.
blue.
It's a very philosophical question because I don't know if we're ever going to get that solved. Because at the end of the day, our system requires somebody to make money off doing that.
Well, right, and so that is the answer, is that if someone's willing to pay for it, it'll get solved pretty quick. If no one's willing to pay for
No,
it,
you're right, and we all know there's a cost. It's just intangible.
Yeah.
Unless somebody, you know, I hate to say it, but if somebody loses a life because of these issues that we're talking about, I don't ever see this being solved.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very good idea for the next follow-up paper. You know, a case study maybe, where we can see the cost of the poor quality of data. And that will be the business case, so to speak.
Yeah.
That will make the case, you know, for improving and paying for a better data quality, you know.
I would love to see that paper. Again, I think the challenge we're going to have, and I hate to pass the buck and kick the can, but like that kind of paper almost has to be written by an operator, because they're the one who's ultimately aggregating the data from all the sources, and they're the one who actually sees what the cost is. And they're also the one who's probably going to have the hardest time getting it past legal to publish it.
Yeah.
Just I'll shut up after this.
One second,
No,
but that's not all this, Mark. Is not a reason not to do it, you know.
Oh no, right, no. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I would love to see it happen. I would love to help in any way I can for it.
We have a few operators here. You know, are you guys
Yeah,
listening?
no, that's exactly. Well, so I can say the closest effort I've been involved in that was similar on the wellbore positioning technical section. We tried to do some similar discussions around collision avoidance management and principles, and the closest we could get was anonymous case studies submitted by operators and service companies that were tabulated in a list, and they could say with as much detail as they could while keeping it anonymous what happened, how it happened, where the lapse was.
Yeah.
And that was the closest that could pass muster. It was also, you know, like 8-9 years ago when the effort was happening. So maybe we're getting to a better place where folks are more comfortable sharing more things, but
this is not, just to be clear, this is not about pointing the finger and blaming.
Oh, exactly.
This is about learning and pointing to a problem, and if we don't do that, we cannot fix it.
Right. Oh, but I mean, but on the operator side, though, they're worried like, hey, if we publish this and someone who was involved in the operation sees it, does that become ammunition for a lawsuit?
Yeah.
And so that's the danger, is that most folks are by default very risk averse, and publishing your bad stories feels risky.
Yeah. I mean, imagine the analogy that comes to my mind is, you know, NASA sending, you know, the space shuttles and trying to hide that the space shuttle exploded, you know?
Exactly.
Because nobody is willing to accept responsibility for this, you know? It doesn't work that way, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we're running out of time almost. Mark, thank you very much. Excellent.
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Very good discussion. There is only one last slide I have. Let me see if I can share the closing slide, which shouldn't be really a surprise what it is there. Let me see here real quick. So that's it. Same pretty much slide as all other times. There is a standing invitation for anyone who would like to present and share here in this forum. The next community call will be on May 9th. We have a few candidates for that, nothing confirmed. I will confirm. There is going to be a message before a week before the call with the update. And like I said, I'll try to set up webinars more frequent than that. Remember the one tomorrow by Matt and Baker. maybe we need to send a reminder out to everybody to attend. And that closes the meeting here. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to attend, and I'll see you back in a couple of months, I guess. Thank you.
All right. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Demetrius.